So now that you understand how to break down the structure of the nose, we're ready to start drawing them. We'll start with this front view. I'll start by sketching in the simplified nose. Since we already done a tracing analysis of this nose, we can simply use that for our reference. If I was drawing this normally, I would simply visualize the simplified nose in my mind rather than drawing it onto the reference. And that's something you'll be able to do as well with more practice. But until then, you can always do a tracing of your reference first in order to become familiar with the details before you start your drawing. And as you can see, the process I'm going through is exactly the same as what we did in the tracing exercise. The only difference is that now I'm taking more care to ensure that the proportions and placement are as accurate as possible, because this simple structure will serve as the frame for the rest of our drawing. And I use these horizontal guidelines to make sure that both sides lines up properly. Next, we'll sketch in the side planes of the bridge. And do the same for the other side. By the way, if you enjoyed this lesson, be sure to check out the full nose drawing course at mydrawingtutorials.com/nose. It will dive way deeper into the subject and teach you everything you need to draw realistic and dynamic noses. Okay, back to the lesson. Next, we'll draw in the rhythm lines to fill out more of the details. Again, this process is exactly the same as the tracing exercise. In fact, we can use the finished tracings from that lesson as our reference. Draw in the heart-shaped rhythm lines that connects the ball of the nose with the nostrils. And put in the openings of the nostril. Once that's finished, we can lighten everything and draw a more refined layin on top of it. If you're working digitally, this simply means lowering the opacity of your layers. And if you're working traditionally, you can use a kneaded eraser to gently erase the lines and make them lighter. Then I'll add in a new layer on top. Let's call this one layin. Now I can look back and forth at the reference and carefully sketch in the details. Because I have this light underdrawing to guide me, I don't have to worry as much about the proportions and can focus more on capturing the small details. Here we can sketch in a little bit of the eye area just to give the drawing some context. As I'm doing this, I'm using the plane information that we established in the tracing exercise. Although I'm not going to just copy over the planes like we did with the simplified nose and rhythm lines. Instead, I'm using the planes where I think it's appropriate, while at the same time mixing in details that I see in the reference. If we drew this nose using just the planes, it can end up looking really stiff and robotic. So we want to use some planes to give the drawing structure, but also incorporate the organic details that we see in the reference as well. Now we can fill in the details around the nose bridge. The side of his bridge is pretty defined, and there's a small plane with a noticeable value change, so I'll sketch that in. Here, the left side of the cast shadow is soft edge, so I'm using these parallel hatch lines to simulate that. The cast shadow plays a major part in giving the drawing dimension, so I usually like to exaggerate a little by making it slightly bigger than shown in the reference. Next, I'll draw in the separation between the light side of the nose and the dark side. This can be a bit tricky because unlike the cast shadow, the form shadow is not as obvious. But just do your best to design these shadow shapes. Here's where knowing the nose plane can be really helpful because the separation between the light and shadow usually coincide with plane changes in the nose. Also, notice how I'm using light parallel hatch lines to create these soft edges. Because the nose is a rounded form, the separation between light and shadow will be very soft and fuzzy. I'll use an eraser to lighten some of the lines on the lip side so that it doesn't overpower the shading when we put it in. Okay, so that's it for the lay-in. Notice how by simply separating the light and shadow using soft edges, the nose is already looking very three-dimensional. You want your lay-in to already look convincing and realistic before you move on to the shading phase. The lay-in is the foundation, and if that foundation is not solid, the shading is not going to go very well. So take some time to examine your lay-in and see if there's any proportional errors that needs fixing. Then we can proceed to the shading. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and if you did, make sure to check out the full nose drawing course at mydrawingtutorials.com/nose. You'll get hours of additional lessons and step-by-step exercises, and learn things like how to draw and shade the nose from a bunch of different angles, how to exaggerate your reference and draw stylized or cartoonish noses, how to draw noses from your imagination, and a whole lot more. So if you're ready to improve your nose drawing skills, head over to mydrawingtutorials.com/nose or click the link below.